My name is Kurt Ellison, and I'm very happy to see you this evening. I want to welcome you to the first of a series of oral history programs sponsored by the Michael J. Colligan History Project and in cooperation with TvHAMILTON and the Miami Hamilton Downtown Center. And we are very happy that the first of these programs will be initiated this evening with Mr. Dave Belew, who's right here, and our interviewer is Mr. Sean Higgins.
As a brief introduction to kind of frame this a little bit, recently on TvHAMILTON you may have seen some of the programs we've been running called What's Your Story? And thanks to John Vaughn from Miami University and Kurt Ellison, we've kind of combined the What's Your Story this evening with the Colligan History Project for a fantastic evening. I promise we will be done before midnight. Maybe quarter till, but we'll be done by midnight because, again, we appreciate everyone joining us this evening. And we have a wonderful topic and a wonderful subject. And as we get into this, I guess I'll introduce you as someone that's been referred to as Mr. Hamilton. I think, Jerry, you're the one that said that. Didn't you call him Mr. Hamilton? Might have. Okay. Mr. Dave Belew has been in the area for a long time, although not originally from here, but we're going to combine his story because it is so intertwined with the city of Hamilton, and a part of Hamilton is the industry that is the Beckett Paper Company. These all intertwined, so that's how all these came together with the What's Your Story, the Colligan History Project, and Miami University Downtown. So again, let's welcome Mr. Dave Belew. Thank you for being here this evening.
Many thanks to all of you for coming out tonight. It's reassuring to see so many friends. A word about myself. I think most of you know me, but maybe you don't know where I came from. I was born in Falmouth, Kentucky, and in 1942 my family moved to Hamilton because my father was doing war work with Harry Marvin Safe Company. And I attended Taylor Elementary, Roosevelt Junior High School, graduated from Hamilton High School in 1949. During my school years, high school years, my first job was as a page at the Lane Library. And I also did some announcing for radio station WMOH. 2 summers while I was in college, I worked at the Becket Mill in the maintenance department, painting, fixing broken windows, hauling loads. It was a good experience, and it was pretty good pay, too. I graduated from the College of William and Mary in Virginia on June the 8th, 1953, and my wife, Marge, and I were married on July 3rd. In 1954, I joined the Rowan Wyman Advertising Agency in Cincinnati. I started out as a flunky, mainly doing pickups and deliveries. I stayed almost 6.5 years and worked my way up to an account executive, to vice president, and a director. The Beckett Paper Company was our biggest client, and I spent a lot of time those later years working on the Beckett account. In 1960, Bill Beckett, who was president at that time, called me and said, "Come in, I want to talk to you." I saw him all the time because in and out of the mill maybe 3 or 4 times a week, but he said, "This is serious talk." he said, I want you to join the company. And I was really reluctant to do that for several reasons. Number one, I loved what I was doing. I thought I would be in the ad agency business the rest of my life. Secondly, I was related by marriage, and I wanted to be my own person. Bill Beckett quickly pointed out, which I knew, of course, that Beckett and Hammermill had merged the year before in 1959, and Beckett was no longer a family-owned company. But I was still skeptical about the merger because I'd seen a number of mergers that didn't go so well. So I shared that with Bill, and Bill said, I need some time to think about it. And he said, well, take as long as you want, as long as you say yes. But he said, I want you to go to Hammermill. And each August, Hammermill had a big conference for about all of its merchants from all over the country, and a sales conference of 3 days. But they also included the Hammermill divisions like Beckett. So along with other Beckett people, as an outsider, I went incognito with the Beckett badge on that said I worked for the Beckett Paper Company. But it cemented my decision because I really was impressed with Hammermill and all the people whom I met. And so in December of 1960, I became manager of advertising and sales promotion for Beckett. I soon became very involved in product development. I spent about a third of my time calling on customers over the country. So I got to know the customers very well. In 1972, I was named vice president of the company and became president, the 7th president of the company, August the 1st, 1974. I spent a total of 32 years at the company and retired early in 1992, actually. So I was there 32 years. I used to say, well, you know, I worked at the agency 6.5 years. That should count on my pension and everything, but they didn't buy that. But there were 32 great years.
So early in your history, you were in the ad agency, so your biggest client was Beckett Paper, your only client, or your biggest client?
No, the largest. We were a small agency. We had Herring Home Marvin Safe Company, we had Ohio Casualty Insurance Company, and a number of other clients.
And in your ad agency, were you dealing in paper advertising? In other words, you're advertising a paper company, but how were they advertising?
I was Beckett?
Yes.
Mainly with inserts, and I'm going to show some samples here after a while.
Okay.
As I say, we were small, so after I got through doing delivery work and pickup work, I started writing copy and marking up type. So in addition to calling on clients, I was helping to create advertising for different clients, and I've discovered I had a little knack for it, and I really loved it.
And they brought you on board with Beckett, and essentially you were doing almost the same job, but for the Beckett Paper Company.
Right.
Very good. Now, I'd like to break in a little bit of the history of the Beckett family. Obviously, you talked about Hammermill. We're jumping back now in history to how Beckett Paper came about and how Beckett Paper came about in Hamilton.
Well, that's, I think, a pretty interesting story. It started with a man named James Beckett, who came from Northern Ireland and settled in Pennsylvania in Washington County. So many immigrants settled there when they came to America. So he came before the Revolutionary War. And in 1803, the year that Ohio became a state, he and his family moved to a spot near Hamilton. Actually, it's where Stillwell Beckett Road is. That's where they settled. His oldest son, Robert, was 9 years old at the time. James Beckett had heard about the fertile soil, the vast wilderness and forest here, rivers and streams, an abundance of fish and game. So he was attracted to come here, as many people were. He was a farmer, and his son Robert farmed, but he was a very ambitious farmer. He decided to expand, diversify. He built a sawmill and a grist mill and became a fairly prosperous businessman. And he sold his goods down in New Orleans. So after a growing season, he would load a barge or flatboat with produce, might include hams, some whiskey, I think, too, and get on the Miami River to the Ohio River, to the Mississippi River, to New Orleans, if you can imagine that. And then, how did he get home? He bought a horse and came home by horseback. Imagine the perils of the weather and the outlaws, and it's an amazing story. But he was really a motivated man. He became a good friend of John Woods, whom many people consider the most influential early industrialist in Hamilton. John Woods became the alder of the state of Ohio. He also served in Congress, and he started several railroads. And Robert Beckett and John Woods became friends, and they decided that they would develop a system to use the water power from the Miami River. And they established what became the Hamilton-Rossville Hydraulic. They not only started it, but they financed it. Robert Beckett had 4 daughters and 4 sons. This is William Beckett, his son.
William Beckett is the son of James?
A son of Robert.
Son of Robert.
Yeah.
Okay.
Grandson of James. William Beckett graduated from Miami University, became a lawyer. He was born in 1821. He studied law with John Woods, whom I mentioned, and John Woods would become his father-in-law. He married Martha Woods. And in 1848, he became founder of the Beckett Paper Company. People say, why would a paper mill start in Hamilton, Ohio? And we often had customers ask that. They thought we'd be right on the river. Of course, we were right downtown. But what brought people here to start a paper mill? The water. The Miami River, the artesian wells. We have wonderful underground rivers and waters that were formed by the glaciers many years ago.
And these are the aquifers that
Yes.
we get our award-winning water from?
Yes.
Our award-winning tap water?
Yes.
They knew it even back then.
And these artesian wells, aquifers, ran from Toledo all the way down to Cincinnati. At one time, there were 23 different paper mills operating from Toledo to Cincinnati.
All on the Great Miami?
No, yes, mainly yes, Miami. And the hydraulic also attracted, it was a key thing, plus the location. Hamilton was a village of 2,000 people, but it was near Cincinnati, which was the biggest city in the West. And you have to remember, there were only 30 states back in 1848.
Way out west. Way out west.
Out west. No electricity, no railroads, no telegraphs. But these people were pioneers. People like John Woods, Robert Beckett, William Beckett, and many other young industrialists were really the genesis of industrial growth here. William Beckett thought there should be a railroad going to Indianapolis. He invested a fortune, a big part of his money, about $1 million, in that railroad, which later went under, and they said he never fully recovered from that. It was his personal finances. But these early industrialists were hardworking people and dreamers. They were visionaries, they were pioneers, and they were friends. The Becketts were good friends of the Kahn family in Cincinnati, and they helped persuade them to come up here with their estate stove company. And William Beckett and Clark Lane were about the same age, 2 years apart, I think, and very good friends. In fact, William Beckett loaned Clark Lane $1,000 to start his first company, which later became the Owens Lane Dyer foundry, and it was a big industry. At one time employed over 800 people. So that's how it started.
And where was it located? Where was the paper mill located?
Paper mill was located exactly where it is now, right by between railroads.
Okay.
This is what the first mill looked like. A man named Calvin Riley from Toledo, Ohio, he was a capitalist, and he had the idea, he'd done his homework, he said, this Hamilton, Ohio would be a great place for a paper mill. So he hired a young Scotsman named Adam Lowry to come here and build this mill for him and to run the mill. Well, the foundation was just underway when Mr. Riley became bankrupt. So here was Mr. Lowry and his wife and family here, no mill, no job. He started asking around, you know, is there anybody who might be interested in building a paper mill? And a number of people referred him to William Beckett. They said, this young lawyer is buying up land in this area, and he's a developer and a visionary. Talk to him. Well, he did. William Beckett took down a shingle and became a paper maker. And that's how it started, with one little paper machine making 2,000 pounds of newsprint a day.
And where were they selling the newsprint to? Again, down the river to New Orleans or Cincinnati?
That was Cincinnati.
Cincinnati was the main.
Yeah, when you think about it, it was not a lot of output, but 2,000 pounds, but they sold it to mainly the Cincinnati Gazette in Cincinnati.
2,000 pounds, roughly, that's less than a pallet, right, of paper.
It's a good pallet.
It's a good pallet?
Yeah. It would be, if you put things in perspective, in those days, the whole output of the mill, when they were doing 2,000 pounds a day, would probably be 30 or 40 wagon loads a year. Compare this to when the mill closed last month, the capacity would require like 2,700 huge truckloads. So it was a tiny little company.
And family owned, family started.
Yes. William Beckett had, Mr. Lowry and his son had minor interest in the beginning. He had 2 or 3 other partners, but he was a majority owner.
So it started out, as you said, with newsprint, mainly for the Gazette in Cincinnati. Where did it grow from there? Were there other products? Were there other needs? How did they build from there?
Well, when they were making newsprint, this was made from rags, and this is a rag room. Yeah. And employees actually sorted rags. They bought them on the market, and that was the major ingredient in paper. They had a contract I mentioned with the Cincinnati Gazette, and during the Civil War, the price of rags got so high that they were losing their shirts at the mill. Mr. Beckett tried to renew the contract, and the Cincinnati Gazette would not release him from the contract. So they stuck to it throughout the war, but after the war, they were barely alive, and they quickly said, we're getting out of the newsprint business, we're going to diversify. So from there, they started going to book papers. This was certainly an upgrade because newsprint is about as coarse a paper as you can make. Book papers, they sold these primarily to the American Book Company in Cincinnati, and one of their big customers, became a big customer, and they supplied books, McGuffey readers. Many of the McGuffey readers were printed on Beckett papers. Then they went to offset papers and had the ability to change over a period of time, and they went into cover papers. And I'll talk about that a little later, but they were doing, this says Buckeye cover, and you can't see this as an embossed emblem, but it said, good advertising in a nutshell. And
with a little nut there.
The Buckeye there. But they were bringing out cover papers. This Buckeye cover became the best cover paper in the country. This was in 1894, and they brought this out.
So they developed other products. Obviously, in doing this, there had to be an advancement in machinery, technology.
Exactly. It was a combination of changing products, but to do that, they had to change their equipment. Thomas Becket, who became president after his father, he was an innovator, and he realized that you had to use something besides rags. They were just beginning to develop wood pulp, sulfite wood pulp on the market. So he wanted to bring that in, and Mr. Lowry was very conservative. He was superintendent of the mill, and he didn't want to have anything to do with any new wood pulp. So finally, after a few circumstances like that, Thomas Becket went into his father and said, you know, I think we better buy out Mr. Lowry, which they did, and in the 1887, the mill became incorporated, but it's been mainly family owned. But it was through innovation, new equipment. They worked closely with Black Clawson. Thomas Becket was a close friend of Linus Clawson, and he helped him. He introduced him to the kind of equipment they needed to have. And in 1905, they completely rebuilt the mill, only to have it swept away in the 1913 flood. But it was a combination of new equipment, new products, advertising. They were an early advertiser, the earliest paper mill to advertise nationally. And they expanded their distribution, which is also a key component of it all. They went from one merchant, Chatfield Woods in Cincinnati, to over 200 merchants around the country.
So that's a big leap, as you say, to advertise nationally. And of course, that gets into your area a little bit later on with the advertising. They were trying to reach out to bookmakers. Were they trying to reach out to regions? Or were they trying to reach out to specific companies? Who was using or calling for and asking for the different types of paper that Becket produced? Well,
as I mentioned, book publishers were one of the earliest users. And Becket, this is quite an innovative idea that came about from Carl Greer, who was advertising manager from 1918 to 46. He had the idea of promoting Becket and promoting Becket products through publishing books about Becket and Becket products.
So self-promotion.
Self-promotion. These two were in 1923.
It says, "What a Buckeye cover man saw in Europe."
Carl Greer was quite a smart man. He got a free trip to Europe and wrote this book about advertising. And then in the back, of course, there's a history of the Becket mill and the Becket family. And that one worked so well that he went across again. This one's called Across with the Ad Man and the Buckeye cover.
So basically, he's creating a cross with the ad man. He's the ad man by the Buckeye cover man. He is, like you said, essentially getting his trip paid for to produce. He's producing. If you know, I guess we see this on the Travel Channel today. Yeah. But how innovative is that? Oh, I have to buy this book. He went across Europe, and this is the thanks for paying for that. And here's what I made for the company. Write it off.
It was amazing, and it became an integral part of the advertising program.
Very interesting.
1928, he wrote this domestically. He didn't go across Europe to write this. This is called the Buckeye Book of Direct Advertising. This book, in 1928, became something of a textbook in the graphic arts field, and it was widely circulated. And Mr. Greer wrote this. And he was working on another book at the time he died. He died in 46. In 1948, on the occasion of the Beckett centennial, the company expanded the book greatly into this. And Mr. Greer had written most of it, but it's...
And I want to point out, while you're opening that one, this is literally an instruction book, everything from commercial engravings. It talks about typesetting. Oh, you got to be careful there. The half tones, different pictures, and so forth. So it is essentially a textbook in advertising, again, to promote the company itself. Fantastic idea, innovative.
And this book had a lot of color illustrations. It was truly a textbook in advertising. Thousands and thousands of the copies of this book were circulated around the country to libraries, to printers, advertisers, advertising agencies, and artists. So Mr. Greer had quite an idea of publishing and promoting the product through books.
This is very impressive. Again, advertising and its mechanical production. Again, the whole idea of advertising is to create a need and then fulfill the need, and that's what they're doing right here. Oh, you need to have this, and here's what we're going to do. It's very innovative, and as you said, they were one of the first companies to advertise nationwide.
Exactly. They were doing national advertising in the late 1890s, early 1900s. Beckett had a tremendously wide program of trade journal advertising, putting ads in magazines that dealt with the graphic arts, the art field, printers. Inland printer was like the Bible of the trade at the time, and Beckett was doing advertising that in 1910, and had a sustained program. People would, sometimes when they come to the Beckett Mill, they were so surprised that we were so small. They said, "But you look big in advertising." But
That's what advertising's all about.
But as we all know, to be successful in advertising, you have to be consistent. And Beckett was consistent with over 100 years of advertising. That's sort of amazing.
And in that process, the leadership was obviously thinking forward. You talked about buying out those that were not on board, but the leadership continued to stay in the Beckett family.
Yes, it was incorporated. It had been a partnership, limited partners, and then in 1887 it became incorporated. And Beckett remained family-owned and operated until 1959, when it merged with Hammermill Paper Company. In 1956, Beckett had installed a new paper machine. They borrowed $1 million, big money back then, to buy this used paper machine from Plymouth, North Carolina. It belonged to Weyerhaeuser. So they had to build a new building for the machine, and then of course they had to invest quite a bit of money in remodeling the machine. And grandmother Beckett, who was majority shareholder, she died in 1957, just a year after they had put the mill, the new machine in. And the estate taxes were enormous, and Beckett realized that they needed to have a public stock. And so they had made paper for Hammermill, actually, for a number of years, black and dark red, and the dark colors that Hammermill didn't want to make. They knew the Hammermill people well, so it was a very amicable and successful merger. But we were small. We were like $5 million in sales at Beckett, and Hammermill was only $50 million, if you can believe that. And so we were like a tenth of the size. Bill Beckett went on the board of Hammermill. We operated as a autonomous division. We never even put Hammermill on our name on our ads or our letterheads. It was an understanding. We competed with Hammermill products, and they thought that made sense. It's like Procter & Gamble sometimes. So we ran our own company, and it was a very good relationship between Hammermill and Beckett. And then in 1986.
But prior to that, I'd like to tell the story of Grandma Beckett.
Oh, okay.
You mentioned Grandma Beckett. She was in charge.
Yeah, okay, I need to talk about her. William Beckett, the founder, okay, he died in 1896, but and he was active. He became ill. He was active almost to the day he died, I think. But his son Thomas came to the mill at age 16. This is young Thomas, the third from the left. That picture. This is the mill. There are 40 employees. The year is 1876. Tom Beckett graduated at age 16 from Hamilton High School. He didn't want to go on to school. He wanted to make paper. He worked in the mill for 6 years before moving up to the office. He's the one then that finally talked his father into buying out Mr. Lowry. He was an amazing man. And he was president. He was at the mill for 47 years. So he was president and when he died in 1923, at which time his oldest son, Minor Beckett, became president. Minor died within 5 years after he became president.
I'm sorry, I have to throw in a pun here. So Minor became the Major Beckett?
Oh, I wish I'd thought of that, yes. Very good.
I'm sorry.
Minor had two younger sons, Bill Beckett and Dan Beckett, but they were still in school. So they wanted somebody with the name of Beckett to run the company. And a cousin named Guy Beckett had grown up in Omaha. That's my wife's father. And he was with the paper business. His father was a lawyer and never been in the paper mill. But Guy had been selling paper for a paper distributor in Omaha. Then he became manager of a distributor in Fort Wayne, Indiana, where he was at the time of Minor's death. So they brought Guy Beckett in. He had the experience and the success and the name. So he became the mill. And he was succeeded then by Bill Beckett, who was my predecessor. Yeah, a story about Mrs. Beckett. When Guy Beckett came in 29, he was made vice president of the company, and he was doing a lot of traveling and running the mill and selling products over the country. Grandmother Beckett was named president when he came. She held that title from 1928 to 1947, and I think she had probably one of the first CEOs of a major company in the country.
Female, yes.
She was
19 years?
Yeah, 19 years. She was never active, but she attended all the board meetings, and in later years, when her health wasn't so good, they held the board meetings in her dining room. And there are stories even that one of her friends would come by for tea, and she'd say, "Come on in, dearie, we're just having a little meeting."
Just having a board meeting.
So Mrs. Beckett was never active in the company. However, I am sure that her keen intellect and her moral character, her judgment, had a great influence on the company and on the community.
She was still overseeing how the Beckett name was represented.
She was a remarkable woman. First time I met her was right after Marge and I were engaged. And we went out to the old homestead, which used to be 510 Dayton Street. It's no longer there. And after a wonderful visit, as we were leaving, she said, "Now, dearie, if Marge ever gets tough and kicks you out of the house, I want to show you where we keep Sweet Alice." And Sweet Alice was the key to the front door of the house. And I'm talking about this wonderful old home. This was built in 1835 by William Bebb, who became governor. And when he became governor, he sold the property to William Beckett in 1846, 2 years before the mill was started. So 3 generations of Becketts lived in that great house.
And again, this was 510
Dayton Street.
Which is not there anymore.
No. Tom Beckett, the father, or the father of Minor and Bill, and the son of the founder, Thomas Beckett, more than any other person, saved the mill and led it to prosperity and success. He was a remarkable young man. I mentioned he started there at 16. He had many good ideas about running a company. Number one, we're going to use wood pulp and not rags anymore. He's the one that invented the cover paper, Buckeye cover. He came to a dry goods store downtown, so it had to be either here or across the street, and he would buy samples of ribbons and satins and silks, take them back to the mill and study them and see if they could match them in color. So this Buckeye cover became the first cover paper in the country, and was followed then by other cover papers. So Thomas Beckett realized how important it was to diversify. He also was the one that knew we had to remodel the mill. As I mentioned, was a good friend of Linus Clausen. He also cared a great deal about people and about his employees. He gave Carl Greer, the advertising manager, $200 and said, "Go out and I want you to interview some of the top companies in the country and find out what they're doing to make the lives of their employees more happy and more secure. And if you need more money, wire me. Among the companies that Mr. Greer interviewed were U.S. Steel, Standard Oil, and Metropolitan Life Insurance Company. Mr. Thomas Beckett was an innovator in employee benefits. He started life insurance, health insurance. He had loans to his employees to buy homes and loans for emergencies. And he started a cost accounting system which was quite unique at the time. He never wanted to go on vacation. He said he couldn't understand why anybody working in a paper mill would want to go anyplace else. Nothing was more interesting. But he did go to attend, he called on customers across this country, and he also attended national paper associations. He was a prominent member there. And I might mention that all the presidents of Beckett Paper, even though we were a small mill always, even at our largest we were small, but all the presidents held key positions in the national paper associations. And one of our employees, Bill Copeland, who was vice president of sales, was president of the National Sales Association of the paper industry.
Well, let's talk about a little bit about life in the mill. You got into, I'm kind of jumping ahead here, but what was it like to work at Beckett Paper? You mentioned they were the first to bring on life insurance, bring on loans. It was obviously a different environment than we see now with major corporations around the country of being so close and so part of the community.
You know, I like to describe it as a family-like atmosphere, and I think that's the way people felt. We were never so large that we didn't know everyone. I think I knew everyone knew each other. At our peak, we were over 500 people, so we were small. But people cared. People really cared about each other, and there was a wonderful feeling. We had a publication called Life at Beckett's. This was an employee publication that was started in the early 40s and published for over 50 years.
Who received this?
The employees and retirees.
Okay.
And we would feature different employees. This is Benny Grews, who's a star bowler. And
in one of our conversations, you mentioned, oh, I know someone who worked at Beckett that used to live in your house, in my house.
Exactly.
Obviously, you knew everybody very well.
This was published every month and full of a lot of photographs. Always a letter from the president. We use Life at Beckett's also as a means of telling our employees, showing them what new colors we were making. For example, we had 4 new colors called wine, so we decided we put actual samples in here so people could see them and feel them.
So you're involved in the company, so they can say, oh, here's what we're doing.
Exactly.
We have Bordeaux, Cabernet, Gray on Bordeaux, Sterling Silver Cabernet. In case you were wondering which, this is like going to the paints section at the store. Love to get a job naming paints. New wine colors introduced, the category of wine. Very interesting. And the Christmas edition.
Well, we had a lot of fun. There was a lot of camaraderie at Beckett. We had picnics. This issue features a picnic which was at the old Meadowbrook in Venice, Ohio. And then we went to the Swordsville, and then became Americana, and finally to Kings Island. But we always had company picnics, and we had company Christmas parties. We always had Santa Claus there. We had a photographer. We had turkeys for retirees and employees, and lots of candy and stockings for the kids. We would have music and a lot of good food, and we'd have fun. But in between Christmas and other picnics, every time you turned around, somebody was having a party. each department would like to sort of compete with another department, so you can have the best food. So we're always having a lot of good food around, and for retirement, we would celebrate for anniversaries, for birthdays. This is a picture of one of the ladies' Christmas parties. I think this was held at the old Anthony Wayne, as I recall. I got to visit that a couple of times. In fact, my son played Santa Claus there. You got it. Forgotten that. After one of the parties that we had, Sylvia Ritchie, who was our receptionist, came to me and she said, "Dave, I have an idea." I said, "What's that?" She said, "Well, Beckett employees are such good cooks, and so are their spouses." She said, "Wouldn't it be nice to share the recipes and have a Beckett cookbook?" And I said, "I like that idea." So the very next year, or maybe that year, in 1979, we brought out a Beckett cookbook.
Does anybody have one of these at home? One,
Hold your hand up.
There's a, you better have your hand. And obviously, what's great, again, more promotion, the fact that you have your cover paper, multiple colors inside.
Exactly, almost a sample book.
Right.
Well, that was so well received that a couple of years later, we decided it's time for volume 2. So we brought out another cookbook. And these are all recipes of employees and their families, and just a great thing to have.
Does anybody have this one? Okay.
My secretary. When Guy Beckett retired, when Bill Beckett retired, when I retired, each of us rejected a big party. And we said what we really wanted to do was spend time with employees and ask them if they'd bring good food in for the conference room. And that's how much we thought of our employees and their culinary skills. We also promoted sports. We sponsored softball, basketball, tennis, and bowling teams, participated in an industrial league. We even had a horseshoe pit built at the mill. We had some really good horseshoe pitchers. And this was a 1949 city champs softball team.
And where did you play? Did you have Beckett have a field, or where was it?
North End.
North End. Okay. Are you on this team, by the way? Are you on this picture?
That's 49, no.
No, I'm sorry. I'll catch up.
I was on the tennis team, though. We actually had an industrial tennis league, and a number of companies, Moser, Ohio Casualty, Champion, Beckett, Ransohoff. We had 6 or 7 different companies that had tennis teams. I wanted to show this picture of Mrs. Beckett. This was taken on the occasion of the 100th anniversary of the mill in 1948. The Chamber of Commerce gave a huge banquet at Wilson Junior High School in celebration. And I think that's just a great picture. That bronze plaque, which was presented by the Chamber to Beckett, we just recently took that to the Chamber of Commerce to display in their lobby. My son carried it. It was
Well, let's jump to that topic again. Again, a little bit out of order, but I want to talk about some of the now history that is being preserved from Beckett Paper, since this was essentially a big part of Hamilton's oldest industry. So the effort is going on to preserve some of this history.
Yeah, that's the good chapter. It's a sad time for everybody. But you may have seen this item in the Journal News. Closed paper mill donates artifacts. And here's how that happened. Tom O'Connor, who was the chairman of the company, called me and called my son Guy, who's been in the paper business, and we were good, all friends, and asked if we would spend some time at Becket to review all the photographs, the albums, the hundreds of artifacts, to place appropriate things with family members and employees, and to make other distribution. The bulk of all this, which is hundreds of items, has been donated to the Butler County Historic Society and its museum. And it's a large collection, and Kathy Creighton, the curator, tells me that there will be a public exhibit sometime later this year. And it's reassuring to know that all those things are in a safe and permanent home. I pay tribute to Tom O'Connor. I have known Tom. I knew his father quite well. We were good competitors and knew each other through paper meetings and associations. I even knew young Tom's grandfather. The Becketts and the O'Connors were very similar in their philosophy of doing business for the same kinds of people. It was wonderful news when they decided to buy the mill in 2005, and Tom was brokenhearted when he had to make that decision to close the mill, but it's sadly a sign of the times. But I'm so grateful to him that he gave us the opportunity. So Guy and I spent 5 days, different days, emotional days at the mill, going through thousands of photographs and many, many items. Some of them you see tonight, and you will see all of them when you visit the exhibit.
I'd like to jump backwards a little bit to talk about, again, when Hammermill bought Becket, again, Becket being autonomous under the umbrella of Hammermill, but still operated essentially as its own company. That was 1959.
Right.
And then the ownership from that period forward, how did that move forward again?
Well, in 1986, there was a corporate raider who tried to take over Hammermill, and that would have been a disaster. And fortunately, International Paper stepped in and saw the value of Hammermill and bought Hammermill Paper Company. So we were part of International until Mohawk bought the mill in 2005.
We want to get into more samples here in colors, but also I want to talk a little bit about you and your history. You were at Becket for 32 years.
32 years.
And you talked about coming on, starting in advertising, moving up to vice president and so forth. What were some of the things that I guess your strongest memories, what were you most proud of? Obviously the family ties were something, as you mentioned, with the retirements that were very important. What really are the proud moments of Beckett Paper with you?
Well, I think I was most proud of our employees. We really had we were so fortunate, great people, people who really cared, they were kind, they were dedicated, and skilled. They knew what they were doing, so I was just proud to be part of that. And I do take great pride in the fact that I had the opportunity to help move the company forward by developing new products. That was the name of the game. Larger mills were beginning to make nice white papers, almost as good as ours, but faster and more cheaply. And so we had to be on the move and find some niche markets. And so a lot of my time was spent in product development, also in advertising. Advertising wasn't just something that was a sideline at Becket. It was a very crucial part of the whole program. And the last 4 or 5 years that I was president, I led the charge to promote and increase our export business. So we were finding about 30 different countries at the time I retired. And I was very proud and pleased with the number of employees who gave back to the community at every level. It wasn't just management. People at every level were involved. I think in some ways we were the most involved company in town, even though we certainly weren't the largest. I'm proud of the fact we had a chapel in our company, and that surprises most people. One time during one of the recessions in the 70s. An employee came to my office one day and said, "Dave, I have an idea." He said, "With everything going on, we need some inspiration and faith." He said, "Can we have a chapel?" Well, I thought that was a great idea. I said, "Sure." He said, "I found a spot for it. You don't have to add on at all. There's a little, like a storage area. It's empty." And he said, "You buy it and I'll build it." So we had a chapel. We even had a beautiful little stained glass window in it. We didn't hold any services, no. We didn't keep any record of who went to the chapel. But it was used a lot, open 24/7, and we had inspirational pamphlets like guideposts and others there for employees. But I always thought that was I was proud we could do that.
And the fact that you and the company was open to someone coming to your office and making a suggestion.
Exactly.
Much less a suggestion that may not fly in a lot of companies, especially today. That's impressive.
One of the things about being small was that we were the headquarters. We had one office. Some of you worked there and some of you have been there. I mean, there were like 8 or 10 offices off of a lobby. So you didn't have to go very far to get an answer on anything. And because of our size, we could do a lot of things that bigger companies couldn't have. We were trying to move more into colored papers because we were primarily a white paper mill until the 30s, 40s, even 50s. Beckett was a pioneering little company. Beckett Brilliant Opaque was the first nationally advertised lithographic paper on the market. And for many years, it was the bread and butter of the company. And then in 1954, we brought out a sheet called High White. This was the first fluorescent white paper, really bright white, and it was the first one in the industry. Of course, competition came on fast, so we were always moving in different directions and trying to carve out new markets.
It's interesting, again, you talk about, it's called High White. It really does pop, that white. Of course, the picture, is helpful to, the way it's set up, but that does pop, as does the eyes on this one. We'll look at these. So we will open it to questions here in a couple minutes. I want to go ahead and let Dave run through some of these samples to see what the Beckett Company had produced.
Okay, I was mentioning the fact we were small. We could make quick decisions. We had relatively small equipment, so we could do short runs. We decided we wanted to try a color. We didn't have to go through any red tape. We'd say, okay, let's try it. We'd try it. We'd do it. And so as we were searching for some new markets, one day, Becket Offset had been one of our key grades starting back in the early 30s. And it consisted of a couple of whites and 6 or 7 pale colors. And linen finish, which is comparable to a linen cloth, had been the most popular finish on white papers many years before, and I knew that, but it had died out and other finishes had taken over, so nobody knew anything about linen finish. One day I was brainstorming, and I thought, I wonder what, if we put linen finish on these colors, maybe it would be new to people. So we ran some samples. Bill Beckett said, I think let's try it. And we ran some samples, had a professional market survey made, these samples. They came back and the feedback said, yeah, people like it, it's new. So we said we can't call it linen Beckett Offset. That's not good marketing. We need a name for it. So one day we had also decided to add a few more colors. I went to Bill's office and said, okay, we need a name. So he leaned back and he said, pulled out his dictionary, his paper dictionary. He said, let's look up linen. He kept reading me the definitions of linen, and finally he said, cambric, cambric, cambric. And I said, cambric, cambric. He said, eureka, it's cambric. And that's how it happened. I mean, we had fun naming. We named practically all of our colors and our grades of paper. the cambric, this was how major the grade became. Cambric became not only our most popular grade, but it led the mill and saved the mill for several years, and it was also the pioneer in the paper industry. Pretty soon, other mills started putting linen finishes out, but then we had a grade called Becket Ridge. We did more embossing than practically any mill. I guess we did more than any mill in the country. Embossing, putting rolls of paper through steel rolls and imparting a finish on. And the finish we decided to do was linear, and we were looking for a name. And one day in a management meeting, we said, we have to name this paper with this ridge on it. Mm-hmm. And Becket Ridge Community and Country Club had just been started. So our superintendent, the mill, said, well, why not Becket Ridge? Okay, that's the name.
And looking on the back of this, it has Beckett Paper Company, Hamilton, exclamation point. So you can always tell the era of when things were produced. That was a classic time.
I mentioned Carl Greer, the advertising manager. I wish I'd known him. He died in '46, was there from 1918 to that time. He was a brilliant man. He had such original ideas. I told you about the book publishing. He also thought we should have a house organ. Now that's such an archaic term today, house organ. But back then, that's what you called a company publication. And it was his idea to create the Becket newsletter, and this was addressed to our distributors, our customers. In 1935 it started, and we published for over 50 years. And the bulk of the newsletter were epigrams and essays by William Feather, who was a printer and a writer in Cleveland. And then in the center, we would have news of the mill section, in which we would show photographs. We had articles about employees, about our products and what was going on in the mill, so that our customers could feel like they were part of Becket. And it was just a great way of showing our papers. And of course, we had ads over the place. This was gold embossed because we were celebrating an anniversary, the 50th anniversary of the newsletter. We did something else, being a small mill, that was somewhat unique. In our advertising, we used children in one of our series. We had a number of different campaigns, but one of them, the longest, ran over 40 years, were using children. You've seen the little girls there. Here's a boy, pensive little girl here. Something, when you think about it, we used inserts in magazine. We paid a premium to a magazine to be able to put our ad in there. And when you think about it, how unique to put your product right in the hands of your readers. So we used insert advertising. And we used a lot of our children in the Becket ads. All these kids have parents who worked at Becket.
We want to, we have a lot of products up here, obviously a lot of memories, a lot of history, and we could probably keep going. Like I said, I promise we'll be done before midnight. But I do want to open it up for questions, comments, possibly memories. If anybody would like to direct that at Dave.
Williamsburg is very little my favorite place to visit. What pointed you in the direction of William and Mary, Dave?
What led me there?
Yeah.
What led you, William and Mary?
I wanted to major in history, I thought.
Okay.
I ended up majoring in philosophy and going into business. But it was a great place and a great major.
Oh, yeah.
Dave, one of your employees, Bill,
Joyce mentioned Bert Tillman. Yes, Bert Tillman was a wonderful friend of mine and a very important part of Becket. He went from traffic manager to be sales manager. He and I shared an office when I went with Beckett, he and I shared an office. We were in this corner. Bill Beckett was across here. I mean, but Bert and I traveled a lot together, and he was almost like another father. I mean, he was a great friend and knew paper products, and people loved him. He was and we were just, you know, Bert was a star, and we could name so many people who we were able to attract, I think, really outstanding people.
You left a great legacy.
And then,
Tillman concert.
and then the Tillman concert, with which you're familiar, that was made possible when Mary Tillman died in 1981. She left a bequest to the foundation, and that's why we have a Tillman concert. William Beckett, the founder, I wanted to mention that he was a mover and shaker, but he didn't run for office, but he believed in good government. He was interested in politics. He was an intimate friend of Abraham Lincoln's, and he helped elect Abraham Lincoln, and he visited him in the White House. And Tom Beckett was active in the community. He was one of the founders of the Chamber of Commerce, and Guy Beckett traveled like 70% of the time, at least, right? And but he found time to take leadership positions, and of course Bill Beckett did. Bill was elected to city council 6 terms, was mayor twice, state senator. He was president of the Miami University Board, and started the Pulp and Paper Foundation. He and Nelson Mead were 2 of the founders of that, and all through the years, there's been community involvement, and by, as I say, at every level. I was encouraged by my parents to give back, but when I went to Becket, it became a way of life. I mean, I hadn't been there 2 weeks, I don't think, till Bill Beckett said, "Okay, I want you to go join this committee," and people were encouraged, and it made for a better company and a better community.
Sir, Bob, is that correct?
Dave, you've always been very creative and innovative and still are today. One of the things that I remember about the promotions and that is when you introduced the paper called avocado. Did you tell them that? Remember that?
The question was introducing
Tell them that.
the story of one of your innovations was a paper color.
Well, we were adding some new colors to Beckett Text, one of our grades. An avocado was one of them. And we believed in you know, we knew our distributors so well. We had a great relationship, and we would like to fire them up all the time and tease them. So we would do teaser advertising. If we're going to bring out a color named avocado, we actually went to Kroger and ordered avocados. And put them in a box, you know, wrapped in avocado paper, and we'd do the same thing with different colors. One time we sent out, had a promotion on gold, and we sent out bottle openers that were gold plated. One of the you ask, looking back, things that I'm proud of. I think this little folder came about. It was called the 2-for-1 color selector. We were moving more and more into colored papers, as you can see. But these hardly a month went by, but what we had a new finish or a new color. That's what kept us alive. Because keep in mind, larger mills couldn't do all this, but we could. And we pasted paper. We did more pasting than any other paper mill. That's how you got a heavier cover or a duplex, one color on one side, one on the other. As we were promoting the idea of colored paper, we said if you print a color on a colored paper, it's 2 for 1. You get 1 free. So one day, I don't know where it came from, but an idea, I thought if we could have some kind of an overlay to make it easy for people to visualize.
And get that, what you mean by 2 for 1.
So I came up with an idea of acetate sheets. and you put the acetate over, and it shows what a half tone, what different screen values are, and there are like 11 acetates in that. And by doing that, you could come up with 3,200 different combinations just in that book. It caught on because it was the first, nobody else had done anything like it. So then we brought out this comprehensive sample book, and of course it had the acetate system in it too. It helped sell a lot of paper.
That's interesting. That is innovative, the 2-for-1. And again, the different color acetate, we'll have folks be able to come up and take a look to really get the full appreciation of it.
Sean, I'd like to share one thought. Last comment. I always considered it a real privilege to work at Becket, and I think people felt that way. It was a feeling of we may not have made the most money, but we made good wages, and we had fun doing it. I came across this letter recently in my file. It was sent to me in 1989 by a young man who had worked at Becket in previous years, and his father was just retiring from Becket. And here's a quote. I laughed, cried, and felt with him as he recounted his life at Beckett's. I was raised, clothed, fed, and educated on a Becket income, and am equally proud to have been a part of the Becket working family. My deepest understanding of my father came to me when I, as a Becket employee, worked with him and for the first time truly appreciated what my father had done and continued to do for me. I began to understand that Becket meant to him what Becket meant to him and to our family. I'm very fortunate to have had this experience. That was a keeper, obviously, and I think many people felt that way. I was inspired. There were a lot of times when we had challenges and difficult times, pulp shortages. But when I was apt to get down and in trouble a little bit, I would reread. The Becket people always wrote. Thank God they wrote about the history. And I would reread of all the adversities they'd gone through, starting with the Civil War contract, the economic panics of the 70s and the 80s, the new mill had been built in 1905 to be swept away completely, destroyed by the 1913 flood. Then came World War II and price and the Depression, then World War II and wage and price controls. So there were a lot of adversities they faced, but I always found inspiration and consolation in rereading those, and it gave me great faith.
Dave, going back a little bit, I'm reminded in 1978 when I came to your office, and the HP Deutsche Company was going to be 100 years old that year. You had already made that transition sometime, and you guided me on how to do things and so forth. Well, I don't know that it was a memorial kind of a year. Anyway, we had fun. We appreciated your help.
Yeah, I remember that, Ken.
The comment was about 1978, some changeover, and the appreciation I can for Dave. And again, I think there's a lot of appreciation of what Becket Mill was in the community, for the community. And we haven't tooted your horn a lot, as much as we could tonight, but appreciate your sharing not only part of your history, but the history of Beckett Paper and what it's meant to Hamilton, what you've meant to Hamilton. So, thank you, Dave.
Thank you,
Belew.
Sean.